Are you sitting comfortably? I do hope so, as I now read to you today's selected short story for your enjoyment and delight. This is The Empire Usherette by Chris Tomlinson. Jane found out about the event in the newspaper. She hadn't been back to the Empire since she worked there years ago. The article had made her chuckle. Come and explore the past of the town's most historic old cinema. When Jane had first started working at the Empire as an usherette, it hadn't been historic at all. It had been state-of-the-art. She remembered the plush velvet seats and fabulous gilt details on the walls, and the burgundy curtain which used to sweep open across the screen when the B feature was about to start. The whole place was magical and modern. That was why she had applied for a job there in the first place. Now here she was, standing on the pavement outside the old cinema. Although it hadn't been a cinema for many years, having been transformed into a shopping arcade Jane was part of a little group of people of all ages, all younger than her. She couldn't help but notice this as they gathered. A cheerful-looking man in his 40s, wearing a fetching fedora hat and short red scarf, was checking off names on a sheet of paper. "Oh, good," he said cheerfully, as the last straggler had arrived. "We're all here. My name's Rudy, and I will be leading your tour today. Before we make a start, I would like to ask if there is anyone here who remembers the building as it once was." Jane was the only one to raise her hand. She felt a little self-conscious as the other tour-goers looked at her, although they all seemed friendly. "Perhaps you can fill us in if there's anything I don't know, or tell me if I get it wrong." Although there was a jokey tone in Rudy's voice, it was clear that he was genuinely interested in learning from Jane's experience. "Well, I haven't been here since it became a shopping arcade," she said. "Perhaps some of the inside has stayed the same." It was nice to feel that her contribution was welcome here, that she might have something to add. However, it wasn't in her nature to seek attention, and it did seem a little uncomfortable having all the other guests looking at her. She was soon at ease, however, as the knowledgeable and charming Rudy led them around what had once been her place of work, the most sophisticated picture house in the whole town. The designers had done a good job of converting the building. What had once been the sloped seating going down towards the screen was now a sort of indoor street with shops off it, on the left and on the right. It was better, Jane admitted, that the place was being used than falling down or being demolished. At one point they stopped in what was now a jewellery shop. "I've spent hours poring over the old building plans," the tour guide told the group, "but I haven't been able to get to the bottom of what this room here used to be." Perhaps it was a popcorn stand," a European tourist wondered. Jane thought that she might have been Spanish from her black hair and brightly coloured clothes. "Maybe it was a cloakroom," another offered. No one said anything directly to Jane, but she could feel Rudy looking at her, encouraging her to share what she knew. No, this was the room where all the usherettes used to sit while the films were on. Jane was surprised at the confidence in her own voice. "I used to come here and chat with the girls once we'd guided the last of the patrons to the seats." The tour guide smiled. "Well, I'm glad to have that mystery solved. It just goes to show that you can sit with your nose in a book for a month of Sundays, but there's no substitute for personal experience. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more about your days working at the Empire." By now Jane was blushing again. "Well, I don't know about that," she told Rudy, "but I can certainly show you where the projection room used to be. I'm sure I can find my way there again." After the main feature was over and it was time for the film goers to leave, most of the usherettes would sit in the staff room. After the main feature was over and it was time for the film goers to leave, most of the usherettes would sit in the staff room chatting and having cups of tea. But one or more of them would have to do a quick check of the cinema to make sure that no one had nodded off during the screening. "Why do you always volunteer for this job?" her usherette friend Julie once asked her. "No one likes being woken up when they've been dozing in public, and you're liable to get a confused response from them." Jane just shrugged and said that she didn't mind. But the real reason was that when the film was over, Andrew would take off the film reels, put them back in their cans, and pack them away for the next showing. She also knew he'd be able to see her through the projection window with the lights up, wearing her smart Empire uniform, her hair in perfect order, and her manner impeccable as she woke up any snoozing guests. Today it was easy for Jane to lead the gaggle of tourists from the new jewellery shop to the old projection room. She must have done it at least 100 times before Andrew finally plucked up the courage to wait for her after her shift with a bunch of flowers. "I thought that perhaps you might like to have an evening out at the pictures," he'd said. It made them laugh in later years that he had chosen that particular activity for their first date. For their whole married life, Jane and Andrew went to the cinema almost every week. They carried on doing it even when they had to start driving to the new out-of-town places when all the old cinemas that they had knew and loved from their youth had closed down to be replaced by bingo parlours or restaurants. And even when the audience seemed to be getting younger and younger and was sometimes a little too rowdy during the quiet bits, they had kept up the custom. One time, a bunch of schoolboys whistled at a couple French kissing as their train headed off into the sunset and the end credits rolled. Jane leaned over to Andrew. "I'm sure they would have never have done this in our day." Andrew, he laughed and squeezed her hand. "Don't you remember the lads throwing popcorn during the westerns?" I'm pretty sure the only reason the cinemas didn't do anything about it is that otherwise they wouldn't have sold half as many boxes from the trays in the intervals. She had to admit, he had a point there. They had kept up their cinema going until the very last month of Andrew's illness, when he was finally too tired to leave their bedroom. Even then he kept his chin up and asked the children, well, hardly children by then, to bring over DVDs for him to watch on the television set that they had moved up into Andrew and Jane's bedroom. It was just like Andrew to make the best of the situation he was in. Sometimes Jane worried that she was being unfaithful to the memory by staying in and not going to the pictures anymore. But the thought of going without Andrew by her side was too hard. Jane was lost in her thoughts as she walked, almost automatically, out of the shop and across the arcade thoroughfare. What had once been a projection room was now a little bookshop, with stacks of volumes on the floor and shelves practically heaving with novels. Inside, the comforting smell of old books made the place seem older than it was, and unto the untrained eye it would be impossible to know the history of this particular place. The shopkeeper, a youngish man in a cardigan and half-moon glasses, greeted the group as they entered. He was clearly interested in the history of the building as well. I had no idea this used to be the projection room," he confessed. but I do have a few old things which I found beneath some floorboards when I had a radiator change. Let me fetch them." He disappeared into a back room, and when he emerged, he was holding a shoebox containing a tobacco tin, a gaudy brooch, and some postcards. "Oh, do you mind if we take these out to have a look?" Rudy asked. No, be my guest." One of the postcards was from London. It was addressed to Jim, who had been the second projectionist for most of the time Andrew was working at the Empire. The two of them used to send cards to each other when they went on their holidays and pinned the pictures up all over the walls of their room. On closer inspection, Jane discovered the postcard was signed by Andrew and herself. "That's my husband and me, sent from our honeymoon." She blurted out in amazement. "Oh, what a marvellous coincidence," Rudy said. The Spanish tourist burst into spontaneous applause, followed by the rest of the group, and the bookseller insisted that she keep the postcard. After the tour had finished, Rudy came up to her. "Oh, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with the group," he said. "I'm something of a cinema enthusiast, and I'm particularly interested in films from the Golden Age." Jane was glad he didn't use the term olden days. "A few of us get together once a month and watch a classic film in a community church round the corner. We'd be pleased if you'd join us. Perhaps you could even recount some more of your memories working as an usherette." "Oh, I don't know about that," Jane said, nervous once again at being viewed as an expert on something. "Though I have to say I wouldn't mind revisiting some of the films of my youth. It's not the same watching them on your own." "Splendid!" Rudy reached out into his satchel and drew out a piece of paper with the date and time of their next screening on it. "I hope to see you there." By the time Jane got home, she felt quite exhausted. It had been a packed afternoon. Although she wouldn't want to spend every day speaking to small crowds and receiving rounds of applause, the contented feeling she had told her that maybe she should try out some new experiences again to see what she was capable of. She chuckled as she thought about the flyer for classic film showings. Perhaps, just perhaps, she should dust off her old usherette outfit to wear while she gave her talk. The end.